Hey everybody, my name is TJ. I'm a solutions architect here at Figma. So I spend a lot of time talking about Figma, art of the possible, and making sure that it fits and is integrated within your existing tech at your company. Today I'm joined by my friend Hugo.
Hey everyone, my name's Hugo. I'm a designer advocate. I've been at Figma for just over 2 years. Prior to that, I used to work as a design technologist, so working across design and development and managing design systems. So the designer advocacy team looks at engaging directly with communities of design and development and product. And we get a bunch of different product feedback that we provide to the product team. And then we also create a bunch of resources, such as working alongside the solution architecture team and stuff like this. So yeah, TJ, why don't you roll into what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so today we're talking about a really important topic, Figma's license tiers. We have 4 at the moment. We have free, professional, organization, and enterprise. And there are nuances to all of them. And today we're just going to talk about the differences and the advantages and disadvantages depending on your own situation when you're trying to decide, which Figma license tier do I want to go with. So I'm going to kick it off to Hugo to get us started. And Hugo, tell us about starter and professional.
Cool. Thanks very much, TJ. So one of the things is if you want to have an understanding of how these are priced, where to find all of this information, if you go to figma.com/pricing, you can check this page out, which will basically give you a view of the principal features up at the top. And then as you scroll down, you'll be able to see this as a comparison on a horizontal plane. So I'm going to be starting today by talking about the professional plan, and as TJ mentioned, doing some comparisons between what sits within that versus what sits within the starter plan. The key benefits, as I'm just going to talk through based on this list, are that you get an unlimited version history rather than just 30 days. If I scroll a bit further down, you also have the ability to set up private projects. So this is the ability to set some to hide certain projects from inside of your single team. There's also things around prototyping permissions. You can start to leverage the use of audio conversations directly inside of a file, which is a really powerful way to be able to communicate with somebody once you're inside the file. You can do some team and project transfers. And then you can also start to do things like upload your own videos and get into more kind of robust prototypes by utilizing variables, which is something that is only available across professional, organization, and enterprise. And then you've also got the ability to set up 4 modes and team libraries for design systems. So that's basically kind of an overview. There's some password protection in the admin and security as well, which is also really great. And yeah, let's get straight into having a look at a pro account. So, in a starter team, you'll probably have noticed that you have some degrees of restriction around project creation, page creation inside of files. Once you, if you roll onto a pro plan, you have the ability to create as many projects as you want inside of your team. It is isolated into that single team though, so all of your work is going to exist in that one area. So if you're using a professional license, you're probably just going to be a freelancer or somebody working in an extremely small team, maybe like 2 or 3 people, working on a bunch of different projects that you've got in flight. Inside of this view, if I create a project, I've got the ability here to specify whether I want everyone within my team to have view-only access to the content that sits inside of that, or if I want it to be invite-only, which is essentially the way of making it hidden. TJ is going to touch a little bit along what that looks like for teams when we get into the organization plan as well. Once I dive into my file, this should probably be fairly familiar to you, but you have a bunch of different pages that you can now set up inside of this. You'll notice that we've also got the ability to be able to see dev mode. So I can actually open dev mode from inside of this. This was a new feature that we launched as part of Config just earlier this year. So this is a way for you to be able to work alongside your developers. And this is a great way to kind of get started and going through this. I'm just going to close the little view for this here. That's all the onboarding, and this is a really great way of collaborating alongside developers inside of this view. If I jump back to my view here, you'll also notice that we've got this start conversation button up here. This is the audio that we were talking about earlier. This gives me the ability to start conversations with anybody who appears inside of my file. This can be really helpful for if you're doing things like a design crit, or potentially you're actually doing an overview with your development team, and you don't then need to set up a separate Zoom call or a separate Slack huddle maybe. This is a great way for you to be able to just collaborate directly in the file and chat with each other. In addition to that, there's also the ability to set up variables. So as you can see here, we've got we can set these variables on a page level itself, or I can actually start to have a look at variables inside of here. If you're unsure what variables are, if you're familiar with design tokens, this is basically a way of capturing design decisions and being able to allow them to extrapolate across a range of different items that sit within your design system. You can bind these variables to be used for things like color values, for string values, for booleans. There's a whole range of different things that you can use them, and we're gonna be supporting additional types coming soon. If you're on a pro plan, you are limited to 4 modes. So inside this view here, I've got 4 different products. I've got watermelon, cherries, pears, mushrooms, and you'll notice kale, radishes, and empty are all grayed out. You can utilize these file examples that might come from community, but which might have more modes than you have available to you, but you are able to only modify ones that sit within those 4 modes. So you can use this for something like product data, as we've got an example here, or you might even want to be able to do it for things like basket calculations when you get into doing things like advanced prototyping as well. We've got a whole bunch of resources that can be shared in addition to this that show you how to use these kinds of things in the context of some of those features, but this is just to give you an overview of the kind of features that you would get natively inside of Pro. TJ, is there anything else you reckon I should touch upon inside of this?
Not that I can think of right now, and it might be a good time to transition over to the organization plan and specifically what you get with that.
Sounds good. Over to you.
Understanding if the organization plan is right for you, I feel like is kind of a simple thing. You just have to ask a few questions. 1, are you currently on the professional plan and feel like you're outgrowing it? Maybe you have more than one team, or your single team is getting like a little bit too cramped, and you're thinking about having either multiple teams and being able to link those teams together, share libraries between those teams. These are all really powerful features that you get with organization. In addition, if you are a business and you need things like single sign-on, SCIM provisioning, or the ability to automatically update, create, and delete users from Figma, these are capabilities that are provided on organization as well. And a lot of them are kind of baseline features that organization, IT, and security teams need. So there's a good chance that organization is a good fit in this case. In addition, you also get access to things like shared resources. So now you can share those libraries for the entire organization, for all the teams and users within this space. That can be really helpful if you have either a unified design system or a foundations design system that a lot of these teams are building off of and extending. In addition, for your users that have plugins and Figma widgets that they like to use, you can now curate these types of things for them, set them up for the entire organization so that they can be shared between all of these different teams. In addition, we get things like branching. So we're going to jump into a file. And to give you an example of what branching is, if you're familiar with the concept of Git with coding, branching in Figma is very similar. So I'm in a file here. Let's say I want to make changes to this file, but I don't want to disrupt this core file or the main file that's been created by someone. I can open the file, create a branch. I'll call this one TJ's branch. And now I have a copy of that main file. But this is a lot more powerful than just duplicating the file and making changes on my own, because at that point, you end up with lots of files. It's a lot to maintain, and there's not this clear version history that's happening. With branching, I now have a copy of the file that I can edit. Let's say I'm just trying to change the color of this text from green to blue. I'll change it to blue. Hey, Hugo. And I will go ahead and click Review and Merge Changes. So once I click this, I'm actually able to add reviewers. So the editors on the main file, I'll add Kramer. I can request review. and I can say I changed the letters from green to blue just to give them a heads up of what I've done. And I'll click send to one reviewer. And now what's going to happen is that Kramer's going to get a notification that I am trying to merge this branch with their design file. And should they approve it, I could also go ahead and merge branch. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that because I'm an editor on the main file. And you'll see that we've now updated the main file with those design changes that we made. And all of that was captured in a branch. It was merged successfully. And this is a really powerful feature when it comes to managing design systems at scale, collaborating at scale, and ultimately improving the design and iteration process.
I'd just like to add on that, TJ, that obviously with a lot of different teams, if you're using Pro, you probably are going through the process of either duplicating a copy of that file to kind of get the same effect, but then you don't have a way of tracking a version history against all of the changes that might happen against a design. And when it comes to library management in particular, you want to localize all of those changes inside a single file because you don't want to have to keep using, say, the swap library feature to be able to keep changing those components out for the other version. So this is a way of kind of expanding beyond just the version history that's stored locally inside of it and creating like a slightly more elaborate and complex workflow to support your needs when you've got multiple different people working simultaneously inside the same file. Branching is a really great way to be able to support those changes, particularly if you're maybe working asynchronously. It's a great way if you've got people based all around the world, different designers that are based in different locales, to start to think about how you might be able to manage those changes in a more structured fashion rather than having to do things like duplicate files, look through version history, try and find the changes. It gives you those points of comparison, which is great. One other thing that I think would be worth bringing up is also that with the idea of libraries, you've also got library analytics. So maybe we can dive in and just show a little bit of information around library analytics and how you can think about that inside of design systems.
Yeah, I'll pass it off to you if you have an example you can share.
Yeah, absolutely. So inside of this view here, if I click on the chevron, I can go to library analytics. And what this basically gives me a view of is I can start to make comparisons between different libraries and see how the consumption of components from one library might compare to the consumption of components in another library. In Pro, you have the ability to be able to publish a library, but you don't have any way to compare data that sits between each of those two. So an example of where this might be useful is you might have a version 1 of a library and you are planning on deprecating that library, and you basically made some breaking changes where you want to start to see the adoption of a new library. And so you create a brand new file and you start to create your components inside of that. If I look at this duration tab up in the top here, I can specify that over a longer period of time. So I can look at a period like a year. And then I can start to compare this library of web components to maybe something like, let's have a look at foundations and see if we've got some examples that set within this. And here we can start to make comparisons and see how many inserts of one library relative to another there have been over a period of time. What's also great is you can start to have a look at which teams are utilizing those libraries, and I can even check out whether there have been detaches of specific types of components. So what that allows me to do is if I sort that column, I can see that the button component props is the one that has been detached the most, which means that I can start to have conversations with my design teams to find out why it is that that's being detached, and maybe see if I can make some modifications to the structure of how that works to reduce the need for teams to start being able to make those changes. The other thing that you can do inside of organization is when you go to publish your library, because you now have unlimited teams, the way that you had unlimited projects inside of Pro, you can specify where you want that library to be made available. So if I click on this publish to at the bottom, I've got the ability to either specify that to be a library that's available locally to the design systems team, or I can make that available to everyone within the organization. Why this is really helpful is because depending on how you actually want to structure your organization, you might have some libraries that are available to all teams and all products across your organization, or there might be a library that you store locally to a specific team where only that team needs to use the content of that. So that could be an example of how that publishing might work. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that we want to call out specifically for organization, or do you reckon that's it, TJ?
I might kind of feel like that's it, because I feel like this is leading me into exactly why I'm such a fan of enterprise. So maybe we just start to jump into enterprise. And I love that the segue is structure, because,
Yeah.
it's definitely, I talk a lot about enterprise, but I think one of the best things about it is that as a licensed tier, it really allows you to be intentional about structure, the structure of your organization, your libraries, how these things are set up, how teams are set up. All of this stuff plays into, one, your end user's experience. Are people able to use Figma? Is it productive? Is it accessible? But it also extends to things like the customer experience. So if you have a lot of client-facing work, external collaboration that's happening, Figma Enterprise gives you a lot more control over building and establishing this design space that you're working in, and how you bring people into that and what their experience is. So yeah, I'll probably just jump right into enterprise and we can talk through some of this stuff. So Figma Enterprise. Well, if we go to the pricing page, it all starts with Workspaces. So the short and sweet of Workspaces. This allows you to take all these teams that people are creating amazing work in and collaborating in and organize them. The goal with Workspaces is that we're letting Figma mirror your organization structure, so that when people land in Figma, it's intuitive for them to navigate, to work, because it's a pattern that they're familiar with. It's a structure that they're familiar with. And Workspaces provide a lot of additional benefits. So here in the enterprise admin settings, there's a new Workspaces tab. And this is great because Workspaces allow you to, one, organize your teams and people and put these people into a space for the work that, one, it sets a context, right? If I'm designing in a specific workspace called Global Foundations, for me, I know I'm contributing to our Global Foundations design system that's really being consumed across the entire space. And if I'm doing work more in my day-to-day job, I can be working in my Figma Solutions workspace and partnering with the content that lives in there. And it's just a lot more intuitive for me as a user to be able to navigate between those different contexts. The reason being, we have workspace administrators. So the other added benefit here is that on organization, there are team admins and there's organization admins. And you can get a lot done that way. But there's also a lot of people who tend to need just another little layer between those two things for managing these content and managing the work that's being done. So on Enterprise, we allow you to set administrators for these workspaces who can focus on that curation of libraries and of setting their workspace up in a way that's productive for their users. They can also manage some of these day-to-day administrative tasks so that your organization admins, they're able to focus on the bigger picture, on things like security, IT, without kind of getting in the way and commingling that work with the design work that's happening in the organization.
One thing I'd like to add to that as well is that we often see the challenge of when you feel like you've outgrown an organization plan is because there's a huge amount of, as you say, administrative overhead that you have. And one of the things that I think is really powerful that sits within Enterprise is you can also tailor make the onboarding experience. So if you're having a vast number of new people join your organization simultaneously, then you want to make sure that they're being added to the right workspaces and added to the right teams. And maybe it's worth talking a little bit around how some of that provisioning can happen automatically.
Yeah. So on Figma Enterprise, a consistent pattern you're going to see is automation and flexibility of control. The idea is not that we want to lock everything down and prevent collaboration, but the idea is that we have to balance risk and collaboration, open design, and all of these things so that we can really get work done and keep it safe and keep your design IP confidential when needed. So first, in Workspaces, there's a really cool concept called default teams. So I'm going to dip into the design workspace as a workspace administrator, and you'll see this edit default team setting. What this means is that when someone joins this workspace, they're going to automatically be added as a member to particular teams. And just to your point, Hugo, this is great for onboarding. So as you set up your workspaces, you can say that when a new user is assigned here, I'm going to make them a member of these specific teams. Some common things that I see are there's an onboarding team for the entire organization. And the cool thing about default teams is that you can set default teams that aren't necessarily teams in your workspace. And so the idea here is that we're intentionally cross-pollinating design across the organization. So when someone joins my workspace, me as a workspace administrator, I can say, I want you to join our onboarding hub team, where I talk about how we do work and give you some, a little bit of a sandbox to play in as you get adjusted to working here. But I can also send you and automatically add you to maybe our open team that represents our design system, so that you're also being added into that area. And right off the bat, your first day in Figma, you've got access to the teams you need, and someone doesn't have to manually add you to those things. Another benefit is that in our admin settings, we have two really cool controls. The first is default roles. And this means that on Enterprise, you can set the default license type for users. So on our other plans, the default license type is Viewer. Viewer is a free user. They can comment, they can do some very base level collaboration, but viewers can also essentially upgrade themselves to a paid seat. The idea is we don't want any friction for users that want to be able to get in, start editing and collaborating. And then the governance of that license change is a bit manual on the administrative side. On Enterprise, you can say that the default role is viewer restricted. This is great because these free users will have to get admin approval to become a paid seat. But that's really just the start when it comes to Enterprise. We also give you the ability to use an API to manage licenses. So if you've set up SCIM provisioning, that thing that lets you create, update, and delete users automatically, you can also have SCIM manage user licenses, so that IT and your identity provider, Okta, Azure AD, whatever you want to call it, you're able to manage this stuff automatically, and it's not something that design or your workspace admins or even your organization admins are having to manage in the tool. It's something that can extend into your other processes you've already set up. So this is a really powerful thing. And on top of that, I'll just add, we also have the activity log API. So on the organization plan, you get the activity log, and it's nice for being able to go in here and see the activity that's happening in Figma. What are people viewing? What are they doing inside of Figma? But on Enterprise, we actually allow you to connect to this log via API. This is a huge benefit to IT and security teams. This allows them to systematically and automatically monitor what's happening in Figma, and there's all kinds of cool things you can do with that from a security and a productivity perspective.
Yeah, I think all of that control is really just about trying to reduce the overhead that has previously sat with somebody that would take that responsibility on an organization plan. You still have that process during the true up period, which is great to be able to review those. And what I really love is that we still make it very easy for people to see who it was that was added since the last view. But when you're dealing with the kind of scale of a company with thousands of employees, that can become untenable and unmanageable from an administrative point of view. And that's really where enterprise value starts to come into play, is actually your the external management of that using SCIM provisioning is going to be a far more effective way, because there's going to be a bunch of other software within your ecosystem that will also be managed in a similar way. And you want to make sure that you remove licenses en masse for that user, add them all when they join and remove them all when they leave the organization. And so you want to make sure that you can manage that in a very coherent and consistent way. So basically what we're trying to do in each of these instances is reduce some of that friction and that pain of doing these things manually. And I think that's like a consistent story to tell throughout each of the different paid plans that exist. You can do all the things pretty much in each of those plans. It just requires more workarounds, more manual work to try and elicit some of the same results. But with each of the different plans, it's making that process automated, as you said at the start. So
I love that take. And we've talked a lot about how Enterprise is automating stuff for administrators in security, but let's pivot. Let's talk about Enterprise and end users and what kind of awesome things we can do with Enterprise actually in the file and with our libraries and things. So what do you think? How should we start?
So I think this is really good opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about aspects to do with variables. I showcased in the previous example how obviously on professional and organization, you're limited to 4 modes. But I wanted to talk a little bit about library structure. Sometimes you might need more modes, sometimes you won't. So an example of where that's the case, where there's slightly fewer modes in in this instance is when you're starting to set up your system, you could have your semantic sizes, your semantic colors, and your primitive colors all potentially stored within the same file. What you'll notice here is actually if we append the name of the collection with an underscore, that will mean that it isn't published out, but we're still able to alias some of those values directly inside of our semantic color collection, which is really great. Now, this is just an instance where we've only got light and dark, but maybe you're working with some accessibility requirements and you actually might need more than just light and dark. You might need multiple different modes to access different forms of color, to make sure that you're supporting, different forms of color blindness. And that's something that could very easily extend beyond for particular collections. And if I go over to my demo shop file here and have a look at my local variables, I've got a group of different products here, and this is the example that we were showcasing earlier. And now with Enterprise, you actually don't have that constraint anymore of only having 4 modes within a single collection. You can now support up to 40 different modes. So if you're doing something with a sample set of data for aspects of different products, this is a way that you can start to think about utilizing this functionality. This also makes the process of using it inside of advanced prototyping much easier, because you can actually set modes as overrides on individual elements, and then you can actually leverage that functionality inside of some of the advanced prototyping. So all of that makes that process a lot easier when you're dealing with prototypes that have that greater degree of complexity. And this is something that we're planning on supporting on Enterprise specifically, with aspects to do with extended collections, which will allow you to do some relational connections that sit between your modes for maybe a single brand and another brand. And this is an example where if you are an organization that's made up of multiple different companies, Enterprise makes sense, because eventually you'll be able to have that switch between different brands. So if you have something like a white label system, you'll be able to think about how you set your collections up relative to that. In addition to that, there's also the possibility of connecting the information that you store in your collections to the REST API. So on something that is an enterprise only feature is that you are able to access the information that sits inside these collections directly via the REST API, so that you can keep things like your design tokens in sync between what you have within your collection and what you have within your code base. So that means that you can monitor for things like changes inside of the collections, and then you'll be able to receive those updates from that. We'll actually have some resources available fairly soon to be able to share how you'll be able to set those things up. So make sure to be able to keep a lookout for those. I think that basically kind of summarizes most of the features that are exclusive to Enterprise, and which is, just as a quick summary, the ability to set up more modes, and there'll be a lot more features that will be coming soon around extended collections, and then also the REST API that will allow you to connect to your code base as well. So yeah, back to you, TJ.
Yeah, I think that was great. And honestly, we really only touched the surface of Enterprise. It's a pretty tall order to review everything available in Enterprise in such a short amount of time. So definitely click this, go check out the pricing page, look at all the differences, and we'd love to talk to you more about these plans and what comes next for you. So Hugo, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming by.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right. Appreciate y'all. See you later.
Bye.